Go on, all yours.
Okay. So yeah, so one of from one of the perspectives that I'm going to be sharing from is program, in addition to my personal experiences and trying to upskill myself in this area, I've attended and got certified in a program called a Modern Classroom Certified Trainer. So it deals specifically with what we're talking about here. And Heather, just to cut you off, the group is mostly asked to look at how they can take what they would normally do face-to-face in a large group and try to make that applicable for virtual.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Okay. So basically everything that you're going to be doing in converting your program or how you would normally operate into a virtual space and deep, we're really going to go into what you were asking about in terms of how do you gauge the audience and their, how are they doing right along the way. Everything really hangs on two basic concepts. Number one is engagement, and number two is community. So when you think of attending, what you get out of attending a live session face-to-face with people, one of the biggest things you take away is the relationships, the stories you gain from other people that are participating with you. As a facilitator in a live session, it's a lot easier. You can see who's engaged, you can pick them out and say, oh yeah, you can see when they have a story to tell, and that kind of thing. So I would say that between engagement and community is probably the hardest thing to build in that space, or something that you have to be most mindful about. But I'm going to start with engagement because that's the part that's probably the most different. So it's not harder, but it is more different. Wow, that sounded like bad English. I'm sorry. But on the engagement side, Deep and I were talking about, and Heather and I were talking about this, I think it was whenever we spoke last, where we talked about relevancy and timeliness. So when you present a topic, let's say, I think we used an example of emotional intelligence, right? You want your topic to, a topic like emotional intelligence is going to apply to a whole lot of people, hands down. Everyone, who knows about it wants to improve it, right? And for themselves and for their teams. But when you look at the world we live in right now, one of the things we discussed was, how do I show my connection to you behind a mask? How do I show, my connection to the material when, I'm having to do this virtually? So, and even then, when we talk about emotional intelligence, immediately we start to think of how we could apply it in the world that we've lived in for however long we've been in our career. So if I'm a leader and I'm thinking of emotional intelligence, I'm probably thinking of maybe my last 10 years doing this face-to-face with my team in a plant, in an office space, whatever. I'm not thinking about how am I doing that virtually. So from a relevance perspective, I want to make sure, you'll want to make sure to update your content, or at least some of your talking points around how that might be different in a virtual space. Just as an example, you never know what the world is going to continue to throw at us, but try to tie in things that are current events, current challenges the business is going to be facing, or the organization is facing, and the more relevant. And you see this when you're face to face, but the more relevant you can make it, the more engaging it is for people. And more timely. Like I said, this situation has impacted a lot of people. And we don't always know the right things to say or to make it timely or relevant in that space, especially when, maybe some people have lost some loved ones, and maybe it's a lot harder than they let on the surface. We show up to work and we tend to leave our personal life apart, but it may create a barrier that you don't even see between their where they appear to be on your Zoom call and how they're actually able to apply it. So they're hearing it, but it's just going right over them. They're not really able to internalize it because they've got so much going on, or they feel like, you know, how am I going to get through this, what I'm in right now? And it's fair to say you're not always going to know how to approach that. But one of the things that is very helpful is asking the right questions. So just kind of asking where people are relative to the business challenge, to the macro environment, whatever it is, getting people to just share that. You know, asking them what challenges they're facing, asking them how they see it connecting to emotional intelligence, how they see working virtually to their performance assessments for that year, or whatever it may be, right? If you're talking about a performance development cycle, something like that. But then I get to, you know, your question about, you know, gauging, or your point about gauging the audience, and the simple fact is you can't. It kind of sucks, but you can't. You really can't in a virtual space. You don't know whether they're texting, or, you know, you'll see it in a live session too. But even then, people have gotten really sneaky at, you know, hiding their phone and not really paying attention. So the answer to that really is to try to make the content as engaging as possible, so that our default kind of mentality about it is, I kind of don't feel like I have a choice but to pay attention, you know, or but to engage with this content, or but to think about the questions that you're asking. So how do we do that? So from, you know, that seems a lot more complex in a virtual space. How do I go about doing that? There's a few tips and tricks, and that's kind of nuts and bolts, and you can tell me if this is maybe too granular. But some of it is looking at what tools you have available to you to engage with your audience. I attended that session Deep did a little over a week ago now, and he used the whiteboard very well. At first, I said to Heather, I was like, "Is this his PowerPoint deck? This is so sloppy." No, but it was his whiteboard, and he was engaging with the audience. He was asking questions. He was typing in, you know, the things that he had to that he was hearing, and some ideas that he was generating, and it was very engaging. There were people who should have had their microphone muted that didn't, because they were so engaged with the conversation that they wanted to keep participating, and that's really what you're looking for.
I love you too, Robert.
But what's that? What's that?
No, I just said I love you too.
Oh. So then one of the things to keep in mind too, it's in addition to all the different methodologies that you, as I'm going to give you some tips in terms of how to engage with people, one of the things is going to be how often you engage with people. That's one of the big differences too between face-to-face and not. When you're face-to-face with people, you are the dancing monkey, so to speak. You're the entertainment, as well as the person who's, you know, imparting the information. And you represent, when you're live with people, you represent a visual stimulus for people, a focus point, someone for them to look at. When you're on a computer, we're on Zoom. I see 6 tiles right now, including myself, and I'm narcissistic, so I have a hard time not looking at my beautiful mug. But you know, when it comes to a group, they've got all these distractions on the screen, and then, as I mentioned before, off the screen. So in order to kind of keep up with the noise, so to speak, is looking at engaging with your audience about every 3 to 5 minutes. And what do I mean by that? That's getting input from them, getting them involved every 3 to 5 minutes. Well, normally when you're facilitating a session, you're going to have, you know, in a live session, you'd have 10, possibly 20 minutes could go by where you're not necessarily engaging with them or asking them to get involved. You're sharing your insights, you're sharing information you came there to teach them. So, you know, that 3 to 5 minutes is kind of the cognitive rule to keep them engaged so that they're not checking out or starting to do other things. All right, so I said that. Let me back up to the tactics of it. The tactics can be simple things like using the raised hand function in, or reactions function, you know, where you can share like an emoji. and just asking a polling type of question every, once in a while, just checking in with people. The other thing is to use the chat. It sounds like maybe an obvious thing, but asking a question where people share out. What is interesting in a longer virtual session, especially if you engage them early, people will start to chat in and almost have a side conversation going in the chat. And when you say things, they start to comment on the things that you're saying, things of that nature. So that's one of the ways that, kind of deep to your question, that you're starting to build that engagement, that people are listening and jumping in along the way. And I'm, belaboring my own best practice here.
Here's the thing, what we often do is, last time when we had, let's say, a Cabra Search session, it was me, Heather, Ram. We as audience were trying to engage and create some topics and discussions with others. So we had about 44 people join in, and it helped because the moment we had someone comment in, there were 3 of us who were fueling that communication and just giving it a little more spark, which helped. So I think, that does make sense. It was a team effort. It helped.
Yeah, and when you have a group that size, especially, you really want to help each other out in terms of having somebody monitoring the chat. If you can get at least two folks here onto the call to monitor the chat, to look for hand raises, those kinds of things. And here's why. When people share comments that are relevant to what you're saying, it's really important that you, as often as is practical, to be able to call out the things that they say in the chat and share those with the group, just to recognize that you're seeing what they're sharing. And again, that level of now we start to get into that sense of community, that connection between you as the facilitator or the facilitation duo, and those participants. Then kind of the last thing, and this is the biggest one people think of when it comes to facilitating virtually, is breakout sessions. And I say that with a little bit of caution, because people think of interactivity in a virtual session, and one of the most common things they think of is using the breakout session, because it allows big groups to come into small groups and have more intimate conversations. And I think, wow, that's great. That's going to really help us build that sense of community, which we're going to get into. But it's tricky, because if you send people into a breakout session and then bring them back, there's actually a bigger opportunity to disengage them than to engage them. So I say that just as a watch out, just to be careful. When you build a breakout session, first of all, you don't want to do a breakout session more than once every 4 hours. So if you have an 8-hour virtual session, doing one in the morning, one in the afternoon, or one in each half of the component, if you broke it over 2 days and you had 4 hours and 4 hours, doing one per session is kind of what you want to keep it to as a rule. The other part of that is, when you do a breakout session, you have to ask yourself, in service of what? So yes, the sense of community, yes, bringing them together, but you also want to make sure that you give them a chance to report out. So you give your participants something to work on when they're in the group together, and tell them that when they're done, you're going to take the time to go around and have each group share what they've worked on or what they came up with. And then maybe you do like what Deepa was doing, and you use the whiteboard, and you just kind of, capture what everyone is sharing out as a group, and it acknowledges all that work they did together, and it gives them the chance to engage and have some pride in, what they came up with as a group. Any questions on those pieces before I move to community?
Well, I want to understand, how can we build on engagement using the breakout rooms? So I understand the point that they may get disengaged, but then typically when we have these offline sessions, breaking up groups is what gives them space to share their ideas, think about it, and reflect. but then I understand the limitations in the virtual platform. So would you have any tips by which we can have them a little more engaging, or something that you would have thought about?
Yeah, if I understand you correctly, you're asking to say, how can I make my breakout sessions more engaging? Is that what I'm understanding? Okay. Um, so again, I think that comes back to, what do you want to have them work on? So typically it may even be something as simple as you mentioned, reflection, giving them the space to reflect on a time in their experience where they've done something or accomplished something or something they're proud of, and how they worked through it, right, in a similar situation, and share that with the group. And then you would say, okay, what did you learn from that? What can you take from that? What can everyone in the group bring out of their stories that they would like to share? You know, thinking of like appreciative inquiry, where you're starting to share in the, would be the design phase, where you're just kind of, everyone's got their develop, right before you go into the develop phase, where everyone's bringing their ideas forward. So that's the idea, is they reflect, they share their experiences with each other, but they maybe are distilling out a couple of things of what worked, or how they could apply it to a current business challenge. And it kind of lends into a bit of brainstorming, you know, possibly, as thinking back on that call you had last week, where they were, I think it was a telecom company or something like that, you know, starting to apply it to their current situation. Kind of taking it from the internal to the external. So you want to give them a little bit of a journey to go on, and then a space for them to share it. Does that answer your question, Deep? Cool. I know I kind of hit polling in chat very quickly, but I'm kind of hoping that I covered that okay. Does anyone have any questions on those, or how you might leverage them, you know, even quickly? I apologize, I didn't get to prepare a whole lot for this, or I would have built in some of that interactivity into this as well. Okay, cool. Good. So I mentioned with breakouts that you start to get into this sense of community. And one of the things that, as I mentioned, is incredibly, it's important, because it leaves your participants feeling like they walked away with real connections, right? With other connections to other human beings, which is ultimately where they feel like they've gotten more value. You could give them the best program and the best knowledge and wisdom on earth, and they'll feel better walking away with 2 or 3 new connections than they did about all of your material. So just taking time to use the chat to have people introduce themselves, give a little bit about their background, any opportunities that you can take to get people to share, their own insights, their own experiences especially, and give them a chance to connect. So one of the things you can do with that is, encourage people to share their contact information, or I don't know how big LinkedIn is in India, for example, but here it might be, hey, connect with each other, just call it out. You may want to connect with each other on LinkedIn if you're from the same geographical area, or, in the same industry, or that type of thing. But kind of create almost like a bulletin board, or have it captured somewhere that, that if people are willing to share their information, just to get to know each other better. Like I said, for me, the biggest one is asking people to share their experiences, and so where they're actually telling a story, and then other people are getting to know them. The second piece of that would be kind of an engagement tool as well, which Deep did a fantastic job of, like I said, was using the whiteboard. Using the whiteboard, asking people to add their input is not only engaging, but it's going to build that sense of community. People are going to get to know each other, and to take it to that level, add on questions like, would anyone like to add on to what, was already said? Does anyone, have any stories related to that, that experience? If you've got a group that's an intact team, for example, and they've maybe gone through a business challenge where they, as a group, and you go back and you're saying, okay, how did you get through a similar problem in the past? You get them to share, and then you maybe get someone else to share their take on the same challenge or something like that, something that's going to, build some more connections and make them feel like they're coming away even stronger. Another thing you can do, especially because of the nature of this group and some of what I've seen of, the sessions you have planned, is utilize pre-work or post-work. And we even call them go-dos. So you want to take what you learn in a session like this and go and apply it. So one of the ways you can use pre-work or post-work, this is less true in the East as it is out here. A lot of people see pre-work and post-work in America as busy work, as work they don't want to be doing. It's not necessarily a value add. It's usually just something to kind of add some dimensionality to the learning, but it's not really critical. So if I don't read that article, I'm okay. But in the East, it's much less common. People, tend to consume what they're actually told to, is important. But again, using your pre-work, not just to say, give an article, hey, check this article out ahead of us meeting so that you get this great context, but giving them an assignment. If you're doing multiple sessions, with folks and you're going from the first one to the second one, partnering them up, taking 3 or 4 participants, let's say you've got 20 participants, you break them up into 4 groups of 5 or 5 groups of 4, and you have them reach out to each other and do something together, almost like a breakout session, but asynchronous to your learning. And that gives them a chance to connect and get to know each other at a different level when the teacher's not around. When you're not there to be, necessarily facilitating it, and they can just focus on each other. Another way to do that is, I mentioned small groups, but it could also be partner activities or interviews. So kind of the same thing is, I'll actually pause for a second and say that, this has more to do with the level of intimacy you expect people to get to. This is probably not new for people who are used to facilitating face-to-face, but the application is new. So if I want someone to feel like they can share at a deeper, more personal level, I'm going to pair them up one-to-one, and send them off to go do something together, or to share just between the two of them. Maybe provide an interview prompt, maybe a downloadable worksheet or something for them to interview guide to interview each other, but that they're going to feel a deeper sense of connection over not having to be the first one to embarrass themselves in front of a large group or even a small group. Along with that, it would be and I'm going to just move into this quickly, is accountability partners. This is pretty common even in face-to-face, but saying, hey, I want you to pair up. I want you to put a time on your calendar 60 or 90 days from now. I want you to set yourself some goals in terms of just applying what you've heard. What are you going to try out on the job? What are you going to try out? Whether it's, if maybe it's personal journaling, around emotional intelligence. I want to talk about the ways that I have consciously done some self-management, and just to make sure to give myself some accountability to it. I'm building a new habit. I don't want to lose focus on that new skill or habit, right? So I give you, by connecting them with an accountability partner for 30, 60, 90 days out, they're more likely to do it, but they're also going to form a deeper bond and a deeper connection with that individual. So that's basically what I have for that. Any questions? Anything that you feel like I didn't cover? Yeah,
But
I think that's it.
What we used to do is we used to have a group discussion. Now the question comes is, how do you have a group discussion on virtual program?
So this is where it depends on the size of the group. So if you have a larger group,
Yeah,
you still want to
may not
have
be
that
possible.
discussion. No, it is. Two things you need to do. You got to make sure you have a moderator, production engineer, proctor, whatever you want to call them, someone in there helping you. And the other piece of it is you give a clear instruction to raise their hand for your participants to raise their hand in the tool that you have, and then your proctor, whomever is helping you, calls on them. So when each person is done, you can keep the conversation rolling that way. And then that also allows you to keep track of time, so that if you know you only have time to get 2 or 3 responses before you have to move on, you get people to raise their hands, you try to get the first few, and then what you can do is, hey, these are great, say something like, these are great experiences, or this was a great conversation, we have to move on. Share your ideas or share what came up for you in the chat so you guys can benefit from each other's experience.
Okay.
I just had that exact problem with a workshop on coaching. It was designed for, I want to say 18 to 20 people, and we had typically 40 to 60 people attending. So we just had to be really conscious about saying we're only going to get 2 or 3 responses and move on, and being really clear about that expectation, but then giving them a space in the chat to continue to share so you can learn from each other.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. Great question.
And what about role play? Role play, is it possible? Not possible?
Yeah, yes and no. That's one where it'd be a good example of breakout rooms, breakout sessions. You may want to, they have to be small groups of probably no more than 4, so you can let people take turns going around. Or you may want to do it as do your program that you're teaching as a series, and then have them connect outside of the classroom to try to run through it. And then just give them like a PDF or something, a simple Word document, something they can use to guide their role play or something like that.
Okay.
You're right that that's easily one of the hardest things to pull off virtually.
Yes.
Great question.
Well, so just a quick time check. We have a webinar starting in about 8 minutes. So I will be dropping off in a few minutes to start the other meeting. And well, of course, I'm sure you all have the meeting IDs if you would love to join. It's an hour-long webinar on strategic performance management. And well, I'm sure, Rob, we can reach out to you in the group, WhatsApp group, if you have more questions or something that we want to talk about.
Sure.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to stop the recording right now.